Paul Klee was born on the 18th of December 1879 in Münchenbuchsee, a small town just north of Bern in Switzerland. This is the story of an artist who spent the first 30 years of his life convinced that he had no aptitude for colour, or even for life as an artist at all. He remained dependent on his wife to look after the household bills as he struggled to find his true course. But all of this would change through a single journey that would prove to be the making of him. Few painters in the history of art have experienced such a dramatic reassessment of their own abilities. From then on, and within just a few years, Klee became one of the most notable and radical painters of the century. How did he get there? Klee was born into a musical family. His father, Hans Klee, was a music teacher from German Bavaria. His mother, Ida Marie Frick, was Swiss and trained as a singer. Music saturated the household from the beginning. By the age of 7, the young Paul was already studying the violin, and he would prove to be a genuinely gifted player, good enough, even as a youth, to join the Bern Municipal Orchestra. He drew avidly from a young age, in the margins of school books and on scraps of paper, wherever he could find a surface. He later said that drawing was as natural as taking a line for a walk. But his gifts created their own problem. Should he choose music or art as his vocation? The decision to pursue art was perhaps based on his view of modern classical music, which left him somewhat cold. His favourite composers were Bach and Mozart, and he played and listened to their music with traditional reverence. As for painting, here was a chance for his own creativity to flourish in utterly new directions, and so it was art that he chose. In 1898, at the age of 19, Klee left Bern for Munich, the magnetic centre of German modernism, steeped in the German version of Art Nouveau, Jugendstil. It was a city humming with new ideas about art, philosophy, and the nature of perception. Klee enrolled at the private art school of Heinrich Neuer to work on his draftsmanship, and later at the Academy of Fine Arts under Franz von Stuck, the same master who taught Kandinsky. But Klee struggled. He was dissatisfied with his own output, convinced that he lacked the natural talent for colour and composition. He was also obsessed with the thought of becoming a man, and felt his life experiences were too narrow. "I hardly think about art," he wrote in his diary. "I only want to work on my personality." Other diary entries record a young man intent on meeting women and having the fullest of experiences. One such liaison resulted in a child, a boy who sadly died as a baby. Klee was, above all, a dreamer. On a hiking trip to the Reichenbach Falls, he recorded how he lay in the grass and for hours contemplated the clouds and high peaks. In Munich, he met Lily Stumpf, a talented pianist from a well-to-do family, whom he courted and would later marry. Lily's steady income as a piano teacher would support the household for years, while Klee continued the patient, solitary work of teaching himself to paint. In October 1901, Klee made his first significant journey, a 6-month trip to Italy with the sculptor Hermann Haller. In Genoa, he recorded vivid impressions of the harbour and the workers who laboured there, a city he described in his diaries as dramatic. Rome, on the other hand, was epic, where Michelangelo's frescoes struck him as spiritual. They went on to Florence and Naples, and whilst he admired what he saw, he knew it could not be imitated. "I must begin from scratch," he wrote. "Everything great and sublime I have been shown, it is not mine to copy. I must find my own way." This sense of returning to basics was fundamental to Klee's thoughts on art. In later years, his notebooks would be full of theory and analysis, page after page of intricate notes about colour and form, the interplay of lines, and the dynamics of balance. Back in Bern, now in his early 20s, he continued to experiment in printmaking and etching, producing fantastical drawings he called inventions that seem to emerge from a private form of mythology. They are witty and eccentric allegorical pictures about pretension and manners, yet he remained, for now, reticent with colour. He exhibited these intricate works in June 1906, but the reception was muted. In the same year, Paul and Lily were married, and they moved permanently to Munich. When their son Felix was born, Klee took on the domestic work, tending to the child's needs whilst Lily continued teaching. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it allowed Klee time to develop his artistic sensibility gradually. At one point, he attempted to become a magazine illustrator, but this went nowhere. In 1911, Klee was introduced to the circle of artists who gathered around Wassily Kandinsky, a group that would soon coalesce under the name de Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider. Franz Marc, August Macke, Gabriele Munter. These were artists who shared Klee's emerging conviction that painting could aspire to the condition of music, and that colour and line could be carriers of inner, expressive meaning. At this time, Klee became an avid record keeper of his own output. He carefully catalogued his paintings and drawings with a numbering system that monitored the volume and order of works as they were produced, year after year. Klee exhibited with the Blue Rider group in 1912, showing 17 paintings, including his View into a Square, made with a combination of gouache, chalk, and crayon on paper. Shortly after, he and Lily travelled to Paris and met the painter Robert Delaunay, whose Windows series fused colour with geometric structure, a technique that Klee's later work would adopt with conviction. But it would be 2 years later from this point, in April 1914, when he set out with two fellow artists, Auguste Macke and Louis Moyer, for a 2-week trip to Tunisia, that his life as a painter would truly begin. Klee left Europe with his two friends via Marseille on a ship bound for Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. As the coast of North Africa appeared on the horizon, he felt the intensity of colours in the landscape changing, more glowing and rather darker, he wrote. At the time, Tunisia was under French occupation, a protectorate established in 1881. Its capital was a layered city, Islamic architecture and Ottoman tradition overlaid with French colonial infrastructure. Trams, gas lighting, cobbled streets running into sandy alleys. Tradesmen occupied simple recesses among the souks. European and Arab populations lived in proximity. For Klee, it was inexhaustible material. He went straight to work. "My head is full of impressions," he wrote the morning after his arrival. "Art, nature, self." Went to work at once and painted in watercolour in the Arab quarter. At the beach town of Saint-Germain, not far from Tunis, he made 2 watercolours. He was dissatisfied with the first, but in the second something shifted. "I encountered Africa for the first time," he wrote. One evening, a full moon rose over the sea. Klee watched it from the shore and felt something large and nameless moving through him. "The evening is deep inside me forever," he wrote. Then came Kairouan, lying inland from Tunis, its Medina replete with Islamic architecture, its alleys shaded and labyrinthine, its great mosque one of the oldest in the world. The 3 artists made the journey partly by train, partly on foot along railway tracks. The following morning, Klee went out alone to paint the city walls and the minarets from the outside. He returned to the city to sketch further, and then, somewhere in the heat and light of that morning, it happened. "Colour possesses me," he wrote in his diary. "It will possess me always. I know it. That is the meaning of this happy hour. Colour and I are one. I am a painter." It is one of the most celebrated declarations in the history of modern art. The day after his breakthrough, Klee felt the need to be alone. His experiences were too powerful. That evening, he ate alone in an Italian restaurant and drank Chianti, his secret debauchery. He left Tunisia the next day, his bags loaded with souvenirs, a knife, leather cushions, rings, an amulet, and an old coin. He left Macke and Moyer to stay on and made his way home, knowing that something essential had changed. "My cart was overloaded," he wrote. "I had to set to work. The big hunt was over. Now I had to unravel." The Tunisia experience changed everything for Klee, unlocking a new fluency in colour he would spend the rest of his life exploring. But then the war intervened, declared in August 1914, just months after Klee had returned home. August Macke, who had stood beside him at Kairouan, was killed on the Western Front in September, aged just 27. In 1916, Klee was conscripted into the German army himself, the very same day he learned that his close friend, Franz Marc, had also been killed at the Battle of Verdun. Two of the finest painters of their generation were gone within 18 months of each other. "There are no replacements," Klee recorded simply. Klee was trained as an infantryman, but was spared the trenches, a decision lightly influenced by his growing reputation as an artist. He was posted instead to the Air Force Replacements Unit, where he painted camouflage onto aircraft, and later as a clerk at a flying school. He continued to make art throughout. He was not a man given to patriotic fervour, and the war seemed to him less a cause for good than a human catastrophe. By the end of the conflict, meaningful artistic recognition was arriving at last. Colour had now entered his imagery emphatically, as had a greater willingness to explore multiple mediums: oil, watercolour, chalk, ink, often in the same painting. The brilliance of Klee's painting technique was now becoming apparent. How he could discover his subject through the work's underlying painted structure, to allow pattern and significance to emerge from the grooves and transformations of the painted surface. Klee was a painter who innovated constantly with his methods, and one of the most repeated was the oil transfer technique. This consisted of taking an existing drawing and upon the rear side of the paper applying a layer of black oil paint. The drawing could then be traced over, thereby transferring the oil paint onto a fresh surface placed beneath. Once this transferred oil drawing was dry, Klee was then free to apply layers of watercolour or ink or other mediums, whilst retaining the integrity of the original oil drawing. By now he was beginning to sell works too. In 1920 he was given a large retrospective in Munich, showing 362 works and confirming what the younger generation of artists had already begun to see, that Klee was one of the most original voices of his age. His slow development as an artist was now beginning to pay off. That same year, he was invited to join the faculty of the Bauhaus, the extraordinary school of art and design founded by Walter Gropius in Weimar, Germany. Kandinsky joined the faculty the following year, and the two men, who had known each other since the days of the Blaue Reiter, worked side by side, sharing ideas, sharing students, and shaping what would become one of the most influential art schools in history. Klee proved to be a remarkable teacher. In his book On Modern Art from 1924, he gave his clearest description of the creative process as he saw it, offering the image of a tree as a metaphor. The roots of the tree were the artist's senses, drawing in nutrition from the world around them. The artist was the trunk, through which the sap flowed, and the crown, visible to the world, spreading in time and space, was the work itself. Crucially, the crown need not look like the roots. The work need not look like the experience that generated it. Something stranger and truer could emerge. One such painting from this time was The Seafarer, painted in 1923 and made using his oil transfer technique with carefully laid washes of watercolour placed in horizontal and vertical bands, steadily darkening and deepening towards the outer edges. What is formed is a grid pattern, an organic abstract texture that acts as a terrain where the action can play out. The central subject is a seafarer on a small boat, apparently being attacked by a trio of sea monsters. The effect is a painting that treads a delicate balance between decorative beauty and grotesque surrealism, and remains a fine example of Klee's unconventional imagination. When the Bauhaus moved from Weimar to Dessau in 1925, and then to Berlin in 1932, under mounting pressure from right-wing politicians who viewed its progressive ideals with deep suspicion, Klee moved with it. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, the school was closed, and Klee became a target for Nazi slander. He was teaching by then at the Academy of Fine Arts in Düsseldorf, and was among the first artists to be dismissed from his post. His painting, struck from the list, expressed his despair. The Nazis chose to label him degenerate and confiscated hundreds of his works from German museum collections. In 1937, 17 of them were displayed at the Entarter Kunst, the degenerate art exhibition in Munich, hung alongside slogans intended to inspire ridicule and disgust. Klee had no choice but to leave Germany and return to Bern. Far from the art centres of Germany and facing new financial uncertainty, Switzerland proved to be a difficult change for Klee. In 1935, after a large retrospective in Bern that did little to raise his spirits, he was diagnosed with scleroderma, a progressive autoimmune condition that hardens the connective tissues, tightening skin and stiffening the joints. For a painter and for a violinist, it was a cruel blow. His hands, which had moved so freely across paper and canvas for decades, began to resist him. In 1936, in the bleakest year of his illness, his output fell to just 25 works for the entire year. In response, he began working on a larger scale, so that his arm, rather than his hand, could carry the mark across the canvas. He deepened his engagement with simplified hieroglyphic forms, and worked on numerous compositions at once, moving between them as his impulse directed. His themes were personal fate and the political scene in Germany, all expressed with his usual wit and nuance. A work like Revolution of the Viaduct from 1937, painted in the same year as the Degenerate Art Exhibition in Munich, whilst expressing a protest against totalitarianism, is delivered with his characteristic lightness of touch. Remarkably, Klee's output began to climb. In 1937, he made 264 works. The following year, nearly 500. In 1939, the last full year of his life, he made more individual pieces than in any year previously, at a remarkable 1,254 works. He wrote to his son Felix with barely contained excitement. Productivity is accelerating. 1,200 items in 1939 is something of a record performance. But it couldn't last. Klee died on the 29th of June 1940 in Meralto near Locarno in Switzerland, where he had gone for treatment. His application for Swiss citizenship was only granted 2 days after his death. He had been painting almost to the end. The words on Klee's tombstone are his own. I cannot be grasped in the here and now, for my dwelling place is as much among the dead as the yet unborn, slightly closer to the heart of creation than usual, but still not close enough. His wife Lily died 6 years later. Klee's influence on the art that followed him is vast and not easily traceable. He left behind notebooks and teaching guides that reveal a mind fully attuned to the creative process and all its potential. Klee's great innovation as an artist was his ability to turn a whim, an experiment, an accident, or a doodle into something significant, to locate the very kernel of the creative act, often with a dark and fairy tale humour. A miniature world might be fashioned from lines that wander against mists of layered oil paint. Undulating contours become trees, mountains, or faces with a simple flourish or embellishment. In Klee's hands, paint became magical. His conviction that a line could carry emotion, that colour was a living force, and that the most sophisticated art might borrow the freedom and directness of a child's drawing. These ideas worked their way into painting, into graphic design, into animation, into architecture. Artists as different as Marc Rothko, Joan Moreau, Jean Dubuffet, and Cy Twombly owe something to the territory he opened up. Klee's art demonstrated that seriousness and playfulness are not opposites. Exploration, adaptation, and growth were always essential aspects of his practice, one complementing the other, neither of them fully complete, always evolving toward what he called the secret places of creation.